Hello, and welcome to the Dissidents Podcast, where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. This week, Elizabeth is joined by frequent contributors Mark Horowitz and Nafees Alam to discuss what it means to be a good university professor and whether student evaluations of teaching are worthwhile predictors. The author of a recent paper has pretty convincingly debunked the usefulness of student evaluations altogether, calling their use misguided at best and unethical at worst. Questions are non-diagnostic, and scores are heavily influenced by course topic and difficulty, superficial qualities such as teacher attractiveness, and are easily manipulated by offering treats on evaluation day. As university professors ourselves, the three of us can find little to disagree with, but as always, we do try to end on a high note. Hi, welcome back to the Dissidents Podcast. Today, I'm really excited. We have Mark Horowitz and Nafees Alam here, and we are going to talk about an article about student evaluations of teaching. And it's by Bob Uttl, and Mark and I did a podcast on grade inflation. We did a podcast on grade inflation, but that wasn't the Bob Uttl article. That was yours. And we did a Bob Uttl article about student IQs and how they are sort of regressing towards the mean, college student IQs. So anyway, Bob actually emailed us and attached this article. And so here we are talking about student evaluations of teaching, why the emperor has no clothes, and what we should do about it. Although, spoiler alert, he doesn't have too many recommendations for what we should do about it that he thinks will work. So I just mentioned, peek behind the curtain, how the heck does this guy get this stuff published? I mean, he actually says that that student evaluations are the highway to hell. He says it more than once in this article, doesn't he? Yeah, I mean, he lays it all out here. Just no holds barred.
He has a very blunt style, which, and as you may remember, Elizabeth, when we talked about his last article, he had trouble getting it published because of his tendency to not adorn his writing with kind of niceties. He's really direct. And but I have to say, I find his argument compelling. I might end up being a boring note here tonight. Pretty much everything he said I found compelling. I was trying to find a criticism and I struggled. But anyway, I don't mean to dislodge whatever question Nafees might have had brewing in his head there.
Yeah. I've always appreciated people that talk to me like a human being rather than an academic. And I don't know Bob. I'd love to meet him. It seems like you both know him. So
no, we don't. We'd also like to have him on. Yeah.
Okay. No. Yeah, but I've always appreciated, especially academics who have all the vocabulary at their disposal and choose to write in a way that is accessible to Main Street, not just Ivory Tower. So just the way that he writes, the way that he sort of conveys that information, I found it to be very meaningful. The highway to hell stuff, that's kind of how we talk when we're not, doing podcasts, academic podcasts, So I appreciate that kind of conversation.
Yeah, no, I do too. I mean, and again, like right at the very beginning, he says, of course that, the evaluations are crap, but also that we don't even know what effective teaching is. So, hundreds of years of reflection, from, writing with quill, with feathers and ink or whatever, and the chalkboard and everything. We get this constant barrage. There's a teaching of in every field, right? Teaching of sociology, teaching of social work, teaching of psychology, teaching of chemistry. And we get barraged by this stuff. And we get a lot of pressure. I don't know if at your universities we have an office of teaching and learning or something like that at most schools. And what they seem to do is just push out the latest article or the latest podcast or the latest, opinion piece or the latest, quote unquote, research on teaching, and encourage us to visit this office and try this new teaching technique, because this is the thing that's going to, to change everything. And we also get dinged for not visiting that office. So that's something we're supposed to include in our self-evaluations for, action. We're supposed to say that we visited the office and that we tried something, from these things. And as the author here points out, every one of those is probably, what are they using as a measure of whether this new teaching tool, new teaching technique, what was effective? Probably everyone's using something different. And frankly, that's probably the only evidence that students are getting better, because it's coincidental with grade inflation. We also have this push to try everything new, just throw it all at the wall. And it's like, maybe they're using that as as evidence that these new things work.
Well, there are many different kinds of measures to establish what is good or bad teaching. And ideally, you'd have a scenario where you do longitudinal studies to see how students are doing for maybe 5-10 years after they've received that education, and if that education has been valuable to them. But that just the parameters of that study is nearly unrealistic. And so, we have to understand that the easiest thing to do is to gauge teaching based on student evaluations, a very consumer style of model where the customer is always right, except when they're not necessarily the customers. And if we end up teaching something that interferes with students' viewpoints and worldviews, I should say, then that could ding us on student evaluations. So if we approach student evaluations the way that businesses do, with a customer is always right perspective, or in this case, a student is always right perspective, how much learning is happening there, and how much adjustments are we making as teachers who, if some of us are untenured or pre-tenure, we're hunting for those student evaluations. Will we catch the vibe of our classroom and say, well, no, if I teach them what the truth is, my evaluations are going to take a hit. So instead, I'm just going to let them believe whatever they want to believe and allow them to give me the best student evaluations possible, so this way I can get tenure. When does it end? So that would be my question.
Well, and Mark, your research actually suggests that professors start to essentially believe their own, that I don't know, they've drunk their own Kool-Aid, I guess, and start to believe that what they're that giving higher grades and doing some of the things that we're talking about is not promoting learning is actually the right thing to do, right? That it's
and there's a lot of themes in the survey that Anthony and I carried out. And just as a heads up to both of you, in our survey, well over half, I think it was 56% of our national survey, don't believe we should be using teaching evaluations at all. So there's a strong majority of professors who recognize this problem, and I think that's sort of important part of the story. And going back to Nafees' point about the consumer model, the main figure who's done the work on grade inflation is this guy, Stuart Rostacher. He has a website called gradeinflation.com. And the arguments he makes, he has a co-author named Christopher Healy as well, but the argument that he makes completely coincides with Uttl. You basically had the rise of the consumer model in the 80s. And with that came with it this idea that, you can just kind of continual improvement, and you have to appeal to the customer. And of course, the core fallacy is that a student is not a widget that you more efficiently, produce in a shorter period of time. Students are all different, and so they come as uneven raw material for us. And the idea that we can, attempts to try to measure effectiveness by their learning is wildly misguided, as Uttl points out, because motivation is a key factor. And we can get into this. All the things that ultimately lead to high evaluations are remote, if not directly contradictory, to actual learning, sadly.
Yeah, and feeling good in the moment is not. I actually now have on my syllabus that discomfort is a positive sign. That feeling discomfort with the material, struggling a little bit with the material, is actually a sign of learning, and not to be avoided. This would presume that they read the syllabus, which they probably don't.
I used to throw the one-liner, if you're not frustrated with me, my upper division classes, I would say that's not the low.
Oh yeah.
if you're not frustrated with me at some point in the semester, I'm not doing my job as I saw it. But nowadays, the therapeutic move has really shifted away from that altogether, and it is really all about student comfort and support and things of that sort. And you end up sounding quite cruel if you raise these the older paradigm of competition and excellence has really fallen out of favor. I think that's why we're here.
Yeah.
My understanding is that teaching awards are almost exclusively based on student evaluations. The teaching award that I got in 2022, the Golden Apple Award, that was based exclusively on student evaluations, and that was something that my past university considered to be the top teaching award for any faculty within that year. So when it's based exclusively on that, then you can't really blame faculty members for prioritizing what keeps their job. But I think there's another part that we should talk about, is that maybe the university education should be a consumer model. So following, since 2008, people have not been having as many children as they did before. So that enrollment cliff is going to come in 2026, and it's going to sustain itself for quite some time, because that's when those kids, those babies, those newborns will be turning 18, college age. And so in order for our classrooms to be filled enough with students so that classes don't get canceled due to a lack of enrollment, is it in our best interest as professors to make sure that our student evaluations are high as a collective? So this way, the 17, 16-year-olds want to come to college because they will be coddled and in a sense, like, they'll have a good experience, and then they can tell their little brothers and little sisters about that good experience. So they'll continue to come to college. I wonder if this is one of the dominoes that has fallen to make university education nationwide the next Enron, something that is just too big to fail. So we just continue doing what we're doing until there's nothing left to do.
Well, that was uplifting. I don't disagree.
I think it's accurate. It's something that Anthony Hayner and I talked about in our survey piece. It's a deep structural problem. It's all based. The problem is incentives, and I would go so far, and I don't know, maybe there might even be some creative disagreement among us. Who knows? I would go so far to say it's not ultimately even administrators, corporate-minded administrators. I think they're in a setting, the industry setting, that puts these kinds of constraints on us and nudges us increasingly toward the consumer. The student is always right, and erodes these standards. It's not in our interest as it presently is configured. The problem, though, when you have a good like this, something closer to a public good, even if it's a commodity, it's still something where, again, students come in with different capacities and they're purchasing their degree. I think that question Nafees raised, where will this end? And that is really the fundamental question. What is the long game here? And I don't think anybody can afford to care about the long game. This is a basic function or problem, I think, with market societies, actually, in a variety of domains, where if you think about the environment, you have all these businesses cutting corners, and the one that actually protects the environment can be at a competitive disadvantage vis-a-vis the others that don't. So universities that really were committed to keeping high standards, well, in the context of these demographic cliffs, well, you're just going to undermine your capacity to get enrollment. It affects faculty's jobs, administrators' jobs. So my big thing is just wanting to be honest about these sorts of things, and instead of trying to talk about it as if we really still have standards, when increasingly, I think, across the board there. I mean, I shouldn't over dramatize it. In our survey, we found that 33% admit to watering down their classes, and 37% systematically grade inflate. And again, those are the ones that admitted it. So obviously, it could be far worse than that.
But there were a fair amount who said, I don't know what you're talking about. I refuse to answer that question.
Sure.
Those kinds of things too. Mm-hmm. I remember that.
They're definitely not friendly to questions that bore on sensitive matters, especially questions about diverse performance of groups. This is super sensitive, but it's real, and everybody knows it's real. Different racial ethnic groups perform differently, systematically. And because that reality kind of bears down on us, you have the market reality also. You have I think a sensitization, which is also a good thing. We're all compassionate. We want students to do well. So all of these factors incentivize us pretty much. I can't think of a single incentive that pushes in the direction of actually promoting serious assessment of student work in the direction of real learning. And it might seem extreme, but what incentive out there is for a professor to really do this? It's just going to hurt their evaluations, and they're not going to get tenure.
Well, I guess my incentive is because it doesn't feel good to do what you're talking about. It's demoralizing. It's depressing. It makes it hard for me to do a job that, when I started, a little over 20 years ago, I thought it was my dream job. I left industry to go, to get my PhD, to go into higher ed, because I thought that I would be in an environment where I was always learning, and that I would be engaging with people who loved learning and who asked difficult questions, and who wanted to ponder difficult questions, and like you just said, to like who weren't sweeping things that were hard, constantly like under the rug. Like I want it out in the open, right? We're not allowed to say things that that we're all talking about here in the hallways or in meetings where administrators are, that it's I mean, it's they act as if they've never heard it before. They're shocked, they're appalled, and I guess they haven't been in the classroom for a while, right? Some of these administrators are were teachers, but 5 or 10 years is a long time. When I go back and look at my old syllabi and I look at them now, it's different, very different. What students are struggling to what I'm struggling to get covered now versus what I covered, even 10 years ago. So that's my reason. Is that I also have to enjoy my job. I also have to not just enjoy my job, I guess, but enjoy the classroom experience. And if I'm dumbing things down or giving away grades, then I don't know how. I don't know how to keep going, I guess. So
When
that's
you're
my
in
reason.
an environment that celebrates that, whoever has the highest student evaluations, you get a recognition, every semester. It's easy to feel like, all right, so if this is how it works, then if this is the game that it is, then that's what I'll play. It's kind of like the analogy of, like, you're not going to bring a football to a basketball court. You might not realize that it's a basketball court. You might wish that it was a football field, but if higher education is what it is, then that might be the game that we have to play. But with that being the case, if it seems like we all sort of understand the pitfalls of that, how would you say should teaching effectiveness be measured in higher education?
I mean,
Well,
you go, Elizabeth. Yeah.
no, well, I was just going to say our author does offer some
Mhm.
options. However, he's not particularly hopeful. I'm scrolling down here to his suggestions. He suggests. Wait a minute, I'm getting to it. So the future of teaching evaluations. First of all, what we're talking about, continue to pretend like student evaluations mean something, and use them the way that we're using them. More peer reviews. Now, I don't know about you all, but we do have a peer evaluation committee. Do you all do that? Do people come into your classrooms when you're up for action and
No.
evaluate you?
Tenure track, yes.
Yeah. So that happens, and it's just like it's like 6 questions or something like that, and it's like I don't know, tried to cover too much material, yes or no, had useful materials, whether it was handouts or whatever. I don't know. It's very few questions. And then they're supposed to fill out that form and then write up a little thing, like, I looked, I enjoyed your class that day, and here's what you covered, blah, blah, blah. And then you sign it and they sign it and it goes in your thing. And Bob Uttl does say, that's like, the issue is that our peers have wildly different beliefs about what effective teaching is, right? And so certainly I think now it's all about, theater, and, you got to wave your arms around, and you got to be happy, and, everything's great and everything. And, I mean, I remember we interviewed somebody one time who was, I wouldn't say he was boring, but he was, soft spoken and everything. And I was like, I've been told that I can be a bit much. That I'm like a little too, I'm too loud. I'm too, I'm pushy maybe, I'm excited, and I want to, and that it's a relief for some people, introverts, to maybe be in a classroom where there isn't all this sort of, like forcing, where, and I had somebody move one time because they were too close to my classroom and I was too loud. So I think it's, she asked for her classroom to be moved because she didn't want to be next to me. So it's like, I think it's good to have these very diverse kinds of teaching styles, right? We have this, this high energy, sort of loud, and maybe somebody like me who require, you got to do all the reading every single day, possibility of a pop quiz every day, that kind of stuff. And then other people who are, a midterm and a final. I think there's value in those models. But if we're evaluating others just on what we think, it's like, oh, well, this is what works for me. So Mark, if you're not doing that, then you must not be doing a very good job. Or I went to that Office of Teaching and Learning and I don't see any of the new stuff, in the lesson that you prepared that day. Where's the validity?
I agree with that. I think those are great points. And I think any attempt to try to establish some kind of uniform consensus on what constitutes good teaching will never be authentic. It'll be administratively opposed in some way, or maybe some group of faculty who end up being headstrong. And I think to the diminishment, along the lines you just said, to the diminishment of teaching, because we all have different skill sets and strengths that we bring to bear. We're never, this is a bit radical of view. I think Uttl has it, and I'm pretty inclined to agree with him. I just don't think, we don't know what it is completely, and we really ultimately can't effectively ever measure it. I know it sounds pessimistic, but I do like his ending suggestions. I strongly endorse those, which are, I don't remember what the acronym is, but basically actual observable things that students could really say, like, the teacher arrived to class on time, what percentage of the time?
Right.
The teacher responded to my email, how many days later? Like, those are real, measurable, observable things. Obviously, students could lie if they're getting a bad grade. That's an issue. But if you have enough students, ideally, that factor wouldn't undermine your evaluation. So I think those quite observable things having to do with the basic function of a teacher. Are you there in class on time? Did you respond to email? Did you provide a rubric? Did you give meaningful feedback or any feedback, right? All of those things make sense to me versus these very subjective, I was looking at my own school's teaching evaluations, and they just have things that, the overall one, which is the most important, is overall the quality of the teaching was effective. If we don't know what that is,
exactly,
and that's what they're putting all the eggs in that basket. It's just, it's wildly irrational and destructive of our craft.
One of the questions on ours is something that they mentioned here was, one of the questions is, what was the workload in this class compared to my other classes? And so one of the things that goes into it is like, if I use a lot of, I use all primary sources, so no textbook, and you do have to read, you can use your notes, but you have to bring them to class. You have to actually read and take notes. You can't use the article, but you can use your notes on any quiz. So that means you have to stay up to date on the reading. Well, that's more work than, other, that goes in, right? So it's like, compared to other classes, how much did you have to, how much time did you spend on this class? So that was one, it's one of those questions that goes in, which is, I don't think a good measure of whether it was an effective class or not.
So is that, is it better if students think that they had less of a workload in your class or more of a workload in your class?
I don't know how that's included in a whole, in the final number, but it's frowned upon.
What's frowned upon? Having too
much, yeah.
Well, that is an anti evaluation, wouldn't you say? So I, well, at least my professors growing up, and I don't want to speak for you two, but my professors growing up took pride in being that one professor that gives you more work than any of their colleagues do, and those are the professors that I've learned the most from. But you're telling me that there's sort of an incentive to reduce workload. So, out of the 5 professors that one student might have during a semester, if I'm the one who gives them the least work, who they learn the least from, then I'm rewarded for that. They just, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that doesn't sound like education at all. It doesn't
No.
have to sound like higher education. It sounds like lower education.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the direction we're going. One of the questions I asked in the national survey was I'm frustrated by colleagues who routinely give A's. And it was actually almost a third are openly saying that. So the danger of all of this is that, like, not to toot our own horns, but we all care about higher education. Going back to your point, Elizabeth, like, we want integrity in what we do, and we want to actually, that's the incentive, is our own internal incentive to be committed to our role sincerely, right? But what can happen down the road as these incentives operate this way is more and more people can be incentivized to do less and less, and then you're basically the bad guy. You're giving too much work. You're getting bad teaching evaluations. It's either going to demoralize you or push you out, and you're going to be replaced by somebody who has no moral qualm about basically just pretending to teach. This is an old idea, pretending to teach and you pretend to learn, kind of this implicit contract. I think the more we have more and more students coming in who are less intellectually ready, to put it bluntly, going back to Uttl's earlier article, and the more you have all these economic pressures and the tenure pressure and the focus on research over teaching, the rewards to that, all of the incentives point south with regard to standards, sadly.
Yeah, I actually wrote in his little summary of those pressures. So in the section of the paper where he's summarizing the pressures, and he has that nice model where he says people need university education and university degrees for jobs. Students need high grades, low workloads, and and then the university needs high revenues. And so he's got this nice model that's sort of showing the pressures to decrease workload, increase grades, decrease standards, and increase satisfaction. So in that section, I actually made a note. One time in a department meeting, a faculty member said, it's like sort of, at the end, like probably in December, say May or December, sort of people talking about like the end of the semester and everything. And this one professor says, well, I got everyone through research methods so you have to get a C or better in that class. So I got everyone through research methods, and everyone clapped. And I was thinking to myself, I have not taught a research methods class where everyone deserved to get through. Like what is it that you did to get everyone through? And they were applauding actually like her efforts, right? Her, I don't know whether it was paper extensions and, all that kind of stuff. I don't know, but it felt weird and inauthentic to me to be, she didn't say, she wasn't talking about the quality of their work or the great experience they had in the class, or my students wrote some really great papers this semester or whatever. But, everyone, I got everyone through with a C or better. And it felt odd to me. I don't know. It just felt, and this just reminded me of that.
Well, this just sounds theatrical, just like you mentioned a moment ago. This is, academic. We talk about political theater all the time. This is academic theater of just like, look what I have done, to be or not to be, and a little skull up, and I got everyone through research methods, and everyone applaud for me. But the question of, well, would they be successful if we were to administer a research methods exam? That's a different story, right? So in collegiate environments, you don't really have that sort of examination. We, college professors, are essentially the gatekeepers, where if they pass our course, it's assumed that they are knowledgeable of that without any further exploration or testing. So, this leads to another part of the article where we realize that the IQs of college students are heading closer to the mean. It's because I think we're not challenging students. We're just saying, well, if you work hard and your hard work still ends up with a C or a D because you've worked hard, you'll get a better grade. That's hard work. It's not necessarily being knowledgeable on research methods, for example.
Yeah, and to go back to your point about, staying, a relevant part of society, how is it, and Uttl talks about this too, how is it that higher education remains relevant if a college education doesn't mean anything? And there's a reason why a high school education doesn't mean anything anymore. So No Child Left Behind fixed that, right? It's this, these were smart people. They knew that correlation didn't equal causation, right? They knew that a high school diploma was not the cause of people, getting, staying married longer, less likely to get kicked out, to get fired, all these, longer, higher eventual income, lifetime income. They knew that. They knew that it wasn't the degree, the diploma, that piece of paper wasn't doing anything. But you have to have a talking point, right? You got to have political theater. So it's like, No Child Left Behind. And so that actually helped us, right? And as college educators, that was a great thing because it pushed, more people who maybe didn't used to go to college, but were capable into college. And we had, great in the 80s, right? The roaring 80s. And now here we are where college education doesn't mean very much anymore. And so now what are schools doing? They're adding certificate programs, they're adding graduate programs, they're doing dual, get your undergraduate and your graduate degree in 5 years. So they're trying to remain relevant or useful or whatever by adding stuff. So, you get this degree and you get a certification and you get two majors, get a major and 2 minors and, and that kind of stuff. That's where I see it going.
So many of comments you both said, it inspired so many thoughts. I was reminded of a few years ago, I went to my niece's graduation at a Midwestern university, and the person who gave the sort of primary talk to the parents said, 4 years ago, we made the promise to graduate your child. Today, promise is kept. That was the first line. I'm thinking, you made the promise to graduate my... So no agency, you know what I mean? It's all, we're going to do this for you. And again, it's what I would say, it's I don't like to use the word corruption because I'm not pointing at anybody in particular, but it's the corruption of the market pressure in tandem with the kind of cultural moment where we're in, where everybody has to be so compassionate. I can't remember who it was. It was a conservative commentator said that the kind of the values of the kindergarten have been brought, or the nursery home have been brought into nursery school, have been brought into the university, where it's all about caring and helping. And it's not about competition and merit and excellence. And so when you have those two forces and you have such overwhelmingly progressive, we've talked about this before. I know many of your podcasts have, Elizabeth, but the overwhelming liberal predominance in higher education means those sorts of liberal sensibilities interface with the market in ways that it makes it very difficult to imagine what could possibly begin to curb these perverse incentives. I had thoughts about it. It's ridiculously quixotic. If we could somehow move away from the debt financed regime, we have almost $2 trillion in student debt now. If we could move away from that and have some kind of public financing, even if private schools, you get some kind of federal money, then professors could actually grade and it wouldn't destroy a student's life. It's like, oh, I'm going to fail you. You're not going to be another $4,000 in debt and, that sort of thing. But to get consensus on public financing when university status has been so eroded in society today seems also wildly implausible too.
Yeah, and doing any of that would reduce how many people are employed within a university, and no one's going to want to give up their jobs. So again, it just reminds me of this too big to fail thing, where it's like so many people are incentivized, have these, as you mentioned, perverse incentives to continue forth and with the status quo, that there probably needs to be a systemic collapse of higher education before people are like, oh yeah, we knew this would happen.
And it's the larger question too of the economy no longer needing as many people. So there's a lot of discussion of AI, a lot of discussion of everything from 3D printing to you name it. We're moving away from that need at precisely the time when university numbers are starting to dip. Only accelerates all of this pressure on us to, like you were saying, Elizabeth, just entice them in, increasingly less ability because now the population mean is we're going to college. Just bring them in, offer them some sort of reward. We're all in this kind of pressured role. I don't see too many solutions. I'm going to try to push at my own university for moving in the direction with our teaching evaluations toward those objective measures that Uttl talks about. Did he come to class on time? How often? That sort of thing. Rather than these highly subjective and ultimately popularity contest type.
Well, one measure too that of students don't care if you cancel classes. This happens a lot. Where
they outright like it. In many cases.
Yeah. And speaking of which, the author does mention, like incentives even brought to the classroom on the day of course evaluations, research on cookies and Hershey Kisses and stuff. I guess I'm not that surprised, from a psychological standpoint. But what did you think of the section that he writes about the research on course evaluations, and speaking of corruption, and the ties that the authors had with the creators of the course evaluations? So this was totally news to me. I don't know, was this news to you? Not that I'm surprised, but it's like a big pharmaceutical kind of model.
My recollection of it, I could have the detail wrong, but my recollection was that you had researchers doing meta-analyses of these student-teacher evaluations that were fundamentally misrepresenting and the facts, trying to make the claim that high teaching evaluations translated to higher learning, and then showing how some of those researchers were actually financially linked to the student evaluation producing companies. So yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Surprised by it, but not surprised by it, but I didn't know,
So many of the multi-section studies were authored by researchers working for corporations that sell student evaluation instruments. And many authors and reviewers of early meta-analyses that supported SET student evaluation validity had strong financial and other interests in that to those. Again, I guess
another layer of perverse incentive there. And so you have giving gifts, basically giving cookies, that works. You have the attractiveness of the researcher, the teacher, that's demonstrated to work. The difficulty is inversely related. That's obvious. The more difficult your course, you're going to get lower evaluations. So all of these things that have completely nothing to do with teaching are the things that actually predict your teaching evaluation. By the way, I don't mean to suggest, Nafees, that your reward was not a merited one.
No, I don't think it was very merited myself.
Okay.
I've been good at popularity contests since I was in junior high school, and I know what that award was about. I'd like to consider myself to be a good professor, but I know how to be popular. And it's sad because I've benefited from precisely what I'm speaking critically of right now. So I'm in a weird situation because I understand and I we can leverage what we know to work in our favor. But then, that doesn't make it ethical. And that's what I'm having this internal conflict with. Is that I know how to make it work for me, but I know that it's not ethical.
So speaking of ethics, what did you think of his argument that teaching evaluations aren't ethical? And he specifically used the American Psychological Association and Canadian Psychological Association ethics. But you two, both of you have ethical codes in your fields. So I can speak a little bit to these, but I'd like to hear what you thought of that section and whether you think your own ethical codes are relevant.
Happy to chime in, Nafees, unless you prefer
Yeah,
to.
sure. The ethical codes at the CSW, the Council on Social Work Education, and the NASW, National Association of Social Workers, it prioritizes the clients that we're going to be working with. It then also prioritizes the student experience. So while it's not completely outside of the realm of what we see in universities as far as student evaluations are concerned, there is a sort of an underlying assumption that students should enjoy their education while still maintaining the ideological perspectives that align with those codes of ethics, which is a different story for a different day. For student evaluations, particularly in some cases, particularly in social work, certain ideologies are rewarded and certain ideologies are penalized, and you both can do the math as to what those ideologies
Yes.
do. So, and we've had plenty of conversation about that particular topic. But as long as a student falls within a particular ideology, the assumption is that, well, this ideology belongs in the profession. This ideology doesn't belong in the profession. So there's an added layer, but still a layer that is consistent with this popularity contest type of measure.
Yeah, a lot of students will say in evaluations, and when I read them, I don't find enjoyment. Oh, most entertaining professor. That should be high on our list.
Yeah.
How we're entertaining them, and again, it is. We know because of the consumer model that that's true. From my own standpoint, just ethically, I feel we have serious, not to be gloom and doom, but we have severe socioeconomic and ecological challenges ahead, not just in the United States, around the world, and we need to be able to address them. And the idea that we're going to erode two principles. We're going to go back to Elizabeth's point. We're going to cheerlead in a fake way on one side, and then we're going to erode the principle of excellence on the other side. So when I've had to participate in that in my career, it's demoralizing. It's one of the reasons, I don't mean to keep plugging my own piece, but it's one of the reasons Anthony Hayner and I called our article Faculty Anxieties, because this is, I think, the norm where we're going to feel people who are genuinely committed to student learning are going to have to feel some degree of cognitive dissonance to be able to carry out our roles, because we know where the rewards are layered and they're increasingly tied to the opposite of course rigor. Sadly.
Yeah.
Well, does that mean that we don't become true professors and true teachers until we've achieved tenure? Because at that point we have nothing to, well, we still have something to fear, but like, does that, when the incentives are gone and we've already experienced all of the incentives, is that the only time that we are no longer incentive driven?
Well, I'm certainly, Mark's tenured, I'm tenured. I certainly have suffered greatly at my university and continue to. So I have tenure, but I am not safe. I am not doing whatever I feel is right without consideration of how I'm going to. Like if I am I start freaking out if might be a minute late to my office hours, because I know not that there'll be a student there, but that there'll be somebody watching.
Mm.
And so I think that maybe non-tenured people imagine a freedom that I don't feel, that I've never felt, but that I especially don't feel now. So there's plenty of misery to be rained down on people even who have tenure. You can still be ostracized. You can still get bad evaluations. You can not get your post tenure. Like there's like it's short money, but you still every 5 or 6 or so years you do a post tenure review, and they can reward you a little like nothing, or they can give you again sort of a token of their appreciation. So is it a lot? No, but they can still withhold it. They can still withhold certain, they can assign you to crap committees. They can or prevent you from being on committees that would then make you more likely to get that post-tenure review evaluation. So they can give you crappy schedules, 8 o'clock in the morning. Department chairs have scheduling abilities. They can, fail to ensure that you have a full load of courses, which means that you're not in compliance with your contract. So yeah, I don't think that there's safety in tenure, and I think even less so now. So
you took the words right from my mouth, Elizabeth. I was going to say the same thing. Obviously, it's better than being untenured. You get some degree of security, but not much.
no.
I remember many years ago at a prior university that I worked in, or when I got off finishing graduate school, they were grooming me to be an administrator, but then I started raising inconvenient questions all the time. And then, but before that happened, though, this administrator, high level administrator, who I was having a drink with, we were at this like function, and he goes, "Well, come on, we can get rid of anybody we ultimately want to if we need to." He kind of whispered it to me. That's sort of like the common sense among administrators. Like, they really wanted to get rid of you, they'll find a way. So anyway, I don't mean to contribute to paranoia, but I do think it's less secure, Nafees, than what you were suggesting. So those stressors are still there, right?
Yeah.
For an administrator, who particularly an administrator that does not carry a teaching load, which I am not one of those people in that role. But if I were to put those shoes on, I could certainly see myself seeing higher education as a business. And if all three of us were university administrators and not university professors, we can certainly see the incentive. And our jobs are gauged on how many admitted freshmen do you have, how's the retention, how are the student evaluations, and this is all nationally shared. Where you go to niche.com or usnews.com or whatever all these sites are, they're almost always exclusively based on student recruitment, student retention, and student evaluations. All three are not measures of teaching. And so as an administrator, if those three are your goals, how as faculty members, ours are teaching, service, and scholarship, an administrator would be recruitment, retention, and evaluation. So this way the pipeline continues to go. I could certainly see, not saying that I agree with it, but it's important to counterpoint these things, right? So the counterpoint here would be that those administrators would probably look at this system and say, well, this is a business. And in order for me to keep my job as an administrator, I have to make sure that all of my faculty members get good student evaluation, even if it comes at the expense of good teaching.
Well, and the danger of that is something I'm working on this piece right now, calling it the tragedy of the campus commons. So the danger of that sort of mindset is when people sort of submit to whatever the market dictates because their survival depends on it. Well, again, I'll hit this idea of the long game. The idea of the tragedy of the commons is everybody can't afford to care about how much fish you're fishing. And then at the end, you have no ecosystem, right? So we have to think broadly about what we're doing if we're going to continue to play the game too. So it's a little pushback against the pushback, I guess, a little in the face there. One thing I did, this is a little off point, but I did it once when I had very significant trust in a particular student many years ago. I basically told her, I said, well, I'm giving you this grade, but this is your real grade. But it was only because I had a lot of trust with her that I said that.
Right.
So I don't know. There's a part of me that wants to do it. I swear to you, I would just love to give like half the class the D's they should be getting, but then they get a B. And I don't understand. Well, that's your grade if we went by traditional standards that I held for 20 years teaching. This is the one in the context of the pressures that we're under. I would be. I don't think tenure would protect me if I was ever that blunt.
But I agree. I mean, and you mentioned this earlier. Like, I long for just honesty about what's going on, and just being able to talk about it with my colleagues, and that sort of water cooler kind of, I mean, that research suggests that's very conducive to a better working environment. When we feel comfortable complaining about things, we actually cope with those things better. And when we're, being told that, oh, that's not really happening, or we're not allowed to talk about it, or, whatever, that it only demoralizes us further, which is maybe, I mean, I used to do consulting in industry, and it'd be like, the people I did manufacturing consulting, and, it's like, the people on the line, on the assembly line, right. Doing the same thing over and over again. And that's kind of, where we are. You place your order at one window, and you pay at the next window, and you pick up your diploma at the third window. And that's how it rolls. And I think that student evaluations feel very disconnected from the day to day.
Mhm.
It feels like it's something we do at the end of the semester, or now they're doing them, like at my school, they're doing them all online now. Therefore, it used to be we'd hand them out in class, and you try to get somebody else who's teaching at the same time to collect yours, and you collect theirs or whatever. But now they're doing them all online. And so it's even more disconnected. And I think even fewer students do it because it's online. It's another step, right? They have to click a link first they have to open their email. They have to click on a link and do the survey within a certain window of time. But when I am always surprised when I get those returns, it's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. It just feels, and when I look at them, it just feels so disconnected. I used to do my own. Do you all do your own? Like, do you hand out like a little sheet, to get your own feedback, qualitative feedback?
No.
I always used to do my own.
You
just
mean
to
your own use?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And I haven't done it since pre-pandemic, but yeah, I used to do my own, like, questions that I cared about, and I did find those useful, and those were, meaningful, but I got told that those weren't allowed to be put into a portfolio. So, because those aren't, the official whatevers of, whatever of the university. And I do want to return to this because the ethics here, I agree with his point, and I agree with the use of, sort of the analogy. He's using an analogy, I guess. But for me, these ethics codes are mostly for clinicians in terms of testing. So any assessment used to make high stakes decisions ought to have adequate psychometric properties, according to the standards for psychological testing. And that's, I agree with him mapping on using it as an analogy for teaching, but I think you would be hard pressed to find in the in the APA's ethics codes anything specifically about teaching. It's about research, treating research participants ethically, and using tests and measures that are reliable and valid for because these are high stakes things. Somebody might get a particular diagnosis, get medication, get denied certain treatments, or maybe denied parole or something like that. These are high stakes kinds of things. I don't, again, his analogy works for me, but I don't think that his argument, I think, is a little bit strong for me.
Well, the one area where I thought made more sense, and I hope I'm not misrepresenting him, is that there's clear research that if students have difficulty with the accent, that
Yes.
leads to lower evaluations. And then if you have high stakes based on that, then you're basically effectively discriminating against people.
Yes.
So that one has a little bit, maybe a little more foundation.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so the ethical quandaries are all over the place.
Yeah. Can we end this on a high note? What do we have to say? That's
I don't think it's so depressing. It's good in the world. And well, 24% of my sample, 24% are optimistic, but that's
okay.
it. Of higher
But
ed.
that was a couple years ago, right?
Yeah, that's who reported being optimistic about the future of higher ed. That's not a very good number, but it's something.
No, I wonder, do you think it would be the same now?
I think it'd be lower if I had to
I
guess.
do too. I do too. Yeah.
Replicate the study.
And I used to feel, I used to love saying that I was a college professor. Like when I would meet somebody, and now I'm like, oh, I'm a college professor. Like, maybe you won't hear me. I kind of like.
But the sad thing, though, is if we have a lot of people who say, "Oh, I love being a college professor," I'd go back to my gloom and doom scenario. Well, what if they're the ones that just don't care and love the game and just have fun doing no work?
That's true. That's
true.
true.
They're like give out A's like candy and don't do any work.
Yeah.
And the students love them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
That's true.
You got to
That's
find a
true.
high note, though. You want something positive, Elizabeth.
I
You
know.
think
What
of
can
anything?
Well, a high note, I think you touched on this, Mark, is that with the appearance of artificial intelligence, you can essentially objectify grading by uploading the rubric and then separately uploading the student's paper and then taking yourself out of the equation altogether and essentially saying, this is what you were supposed to do. This is the description. This is what you've done. I didn't grade you. You're the one who got a 16 out of 100.
Well, no, AI got a 16 out of 100.
Well, then you can blame
Because,
AI, but don't
yeah.
take it out on me. Student evaluations are not based on me, the professor, but rather AI. I think the high note is this: it's that the bubble can grow, and then eventually it'll pop, and then reality will set in. We are at a place where I think that with great inflation and so many other things going on societally and culturally, and showing up in higher education, we're at a point where we have to make a decision. And I think one of the decisions that will be made is, are we going to be higher education, or are we going to be a consumer based model? Are we just going to be business based where the student is always right, just like the customer is always right? These decisions are probably right around the corner because of the existence of AI. Artificial intelligence, why would AI grade a paper to be 16 out of 100 and we would grade that paper to be 80 out of 100? There is such a huge discrepancy that there needs to be some sort of understanding there. So I think one of the questions that was about, like, if your institution were to completely redesign its teaching evaluation system from scratch, what would you recommend would be an AI peer review of professors' work. Because I can tell you that when peers review my work, I wonder to myself, okay, so what is this person's political ideology? What do they think about me? Are they my friend? Are they going to give me the benefit of the doubt? Have they gone through the same trainings that I've gone through? Blah, 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 blah. So a different peer will grade me differently, will evaluate me differently. But if we can harness the power of AI, which isn't really difficult to do, it probably take about 30 minutes to 45 minutes to do, you could have an AI observer, peer observe you, and then make that determination as to whether or not you're teaching effectively or you're teaching for popularity.
And what criteria would it be measuring us?
It would be dependent on the things that you mentioned. How often do professors come to class on time? How clear are the rubrics? How quickly do professors respond? So primarily objective measures. Subjective measures, AI is still a little bit cloudy on. Claude 3.7 is the most advanced, but that's not really saying much. Most advanced AI is still not as advanced as human beings are today when it comes to this subjective material. But it would be objective stuff, measurable, quantifiable things. And once we get to the point where we can take qualitative data and put that into measurement, I'm sure there will be some research done on that. Then we can use that as a tool to measure faculty success. But the way that it stands right now, with student evaluations being essentially the only, if not the only, the primary measure of teaching success, Charlie Munger said it best: show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. So new faculty members, tenure track faculty members, tenured faculty members will essentially hunt for the best student evaluations they can until there's a new game in town. And I think the silver lining is that I'm sure other universities and administrators understand this is happening. So implementing some sort of AI peer review procedure could be an element. And if there are major discrepancies between how AI has reviewed you and how you're reviewing yourself, or how students are evaluating yourself, then there would be some sort of investigation. Why is AI grading you to be, let's say, a C professor, but your students are grading you to be an A plus professor? Well, is it because you're popular? Is it because you're attractive? Is it because you use all the random lingo like skibbity and Ohio toilet riz and whatever the kids are saying these days? That's not education. That'll win a popularity contest, but that's not education. So if there's a discrepancy between AI and student evaluations, then we investigate and figure out what's going on. So I think that's somewhat of a positive outlook, at least in my opinion.
Well, here's an interesting thing about, it is related to this. So I took my university computer in and said, was acting weird or whatever. And I said, well, do you think I have a virus? And they said, oh, we know if you have a virus before you know you have a virus. And I was like, wait, what? Yes. So we actually know all of your keystrokes and all of your everything that so right now, so right now that could already be done, right? So I mean, obviously like in my case, it's a state email, right? I use that as CYA. Sometimes I send emails, not because I want to send the email, but because I want it in writing in a state email to a state email address. Okay. I save emails that have been sent to me that say things like, that's not viewpoint diversity is not the kind of diversity we're interested in. I'm saving that email.
Yeah.
You never know when I might need that, right? So yes, I mean, I know on the one hand that all of that, is there, but university IT has access to what's going on in our computers because it's a university computer all the time. And so all the things that I'm downloading and using, how much do I use SPSS, for example? How much do I use, when am I responding to my emails? What's the tone of my emails, if you will? All that kind of stuff is already, those kinds of things are already available. Of course, if we're using a university learning management system, university has access to all of that, right? Right now, we typically have to give evaluators access to our courses, but if we walk out, if we leave, well, guess what? Suddenly they have access to our course, right? So it's an illusion. It's an illusion that they don't have access to our course at all times. So I think, to your point, those kinds of things could be, already could be done. And I'm glad they're not, because that's creepy. But I mean, I guess you're suggesting that would be an improvement. I think that would be it's very stressful to even think about that idea.
Our next podcast, so I can see myself getting in an engaged disagreement, which could be healthy, by the way. We should have some spirited disagreements on this page on occasion. So yeah, I look forward to that. I remember writing an email to a student, speaking of like embedded in the technology. I wrote an email and it said, the paper inadequately addressed XYZ, and then it underlined it. The email underlined it and said, we suggest saying could have more effectively.
Yes.
So it's like already shaping,
yes.
language.
And that is influencing research. I teach a whole class on psychology and language, and this is impacting researchers' ability to understand human language use and to make, big data was the thing. It's like, oh my gosh, we can use this big data to, to look at people's relationships and the way that they use language and in different kinds of relationships. And so there was like this little window of time where, where that data got used. And now, because we are getting all of these suggestions, think texting, right? Constant suggestions, spelling, corrections. And like you were saying, Nafees, like these, like interesting little, like new terms or whatever, are some of those, getting through or not getting through and that kind of stuff. So it's impacting our ability to even research the way that humans use language. And it's impacting, obviously our own use of language and what we think is correct. So, or I don't mean correct, but politically correct. And, because incorrect language has a meaning, right? Like sometimes we use that. Well, just like him saying the road to, it's the road to hell, right? Like that was an effective use of, sort of, if you will, crass language for most for most academic articles. But those kinds of sort of unusual uses of language are actually part of the way that we communicate and grab people's attention. So I don't know if that was good news, Nafees, but it was a good college try.
You still get an A, right? Because
exactly, you get an A for effort. Well, thank you both so much. We'll post we'll post some information about this article, and I thank you very much. I look forward to the next time that we get together.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Please consider donating to the Institute for Liberal Values. a 501c3 nonprofit organization at ilvalues.org. All donations go to support our continued programming to realize our mission to provide the skills and support required to build community where there has been division, to encourage free expression where there has been censorship, and to foster optimism where there is fear.